Hey guys, it's Charles from Tech Always, and today I'm going to be bringing you guys a $600 RTX ready gaming PC as part of a competition with the rest of the tech fam. So let's get right into it. The goal of this competition was pretty simple. Since we all had RTX 2060s, we wanted to try and build the cheapest and best RTX ready gaming PC that we could, following a few pretty simple rules. We couldn't spend more than $600. Whatever storage we ended up with had to be able to fit all the tests and games that we needed for this competition all at once. We couldn't buy any pre-builts from online. We couldn't use any local deals, so all this should be pretty replicable. We had to be able to provide proof of purchase for everything that we buy, and we couldn't use any deals that we picked up in the past. This meant that everything that we were doing had to be from the start of the competition forward. Also, when reaching that $600, the prices didn't include any mail-in rebates and did include shipping and taxes. So once we had those rules set out, the awards for winning the competition are the best ray tracing PC, the best value, best looking PC, most RGB, and the overall winner for all the categories. With that out of the way, let's look at all the parts that I ended up with and how I ended up getting them. So immediately that $600 dropped down to just $250 because we had to count in the cost of the RTX 2060, which is $350 for the Founders Edition. And because we're all using the same card, that meant that any advantage we were getting was going to come from just the CPU and RAM, so I really prioritized those parts. Through a little bit of research, I was able to find that Battlefield 5, which is one of our testing games, is a pretty well multi-threaded game and really benefits from having at least 8 threads. So that left me as my only options with old i7s, AMD Bulldozer CPUs, and old Xeons. So I didn't really want to go with the Bulldozer CPU as their IPC kind of sucks. And it's not like old i7s are fantastic or anything, but they're still going to be better. So I eliminated the Bulldozer CPUs. So I started looking on eBay for some older Xeons because that's generally where you can pick them up cheap. And if I wanted to get anything with a decent clock speed, it was going to be close to $100. And I didn't have enough to drop over $100 on just the CPU when I need to pick up all of my parts, excluding a GPU, for $250. So that kind of cut out Xeons as well. So now I was left just looking at old i7s. And after hunting through some of the older ones, I didn't want to go first gen, but third gen and up was getting pretty pricey, so I settled on finding an i7 2600K because I wanted to be able to overclock it to help with the gaming. So I eventually found a bundle on Hardware Swap that came with an i7 2600K, a Z68 motherboard that would allow me to overclock, 8GB of DDR3, and an old Cooler Master cooler that I wasn't sure the name of for $175. So this was a pretty good deal. It wasn't amazing or anything, but it did get better, and I'll tell you about that in just a minute. After that, I picked up an 80 plus white 600 watt power supply from EVGA B-Stock, which kind of has become my go-to PSU just because it's readily available every single week. So it's decent quality. And yeah, I went with that. For storage, I just found a random 500GB, 7200 RPM hard drive off eBay. And it's not going to blow anyone's socks off. It's going to be pretty slow, but it was only $7.75. So when it's that cheap, I don't really have a problem losing out on some performance, and it'll definitely have enough space to fit all of the benchmarks. But now I was left with just $50 for the case. But I also wanted to try and get a little bit more RAM because while 8GB is generally enough, some games are starting to leak up into the 12GB or 16GB territory, and I knew I wasn't going to be able to get 16GB, but I thought maybe I'd be able to squeeze in an extra 4 to get up to 12GB. But I also wanted to try and get into that most RGB award by getting an RGB case, which would cost me close to the $50 mark. And this is when it comes back to that motherboard bundle because it arrived and the motherboard had actually been damaged in shipping. So the corner of it was chipped, it has super bad bend, the IO shield didn't really fit, and the VRM heatsink had been knocked off, so it was only being held on by one pin, which meant it wasn't really doing anything because it could just like slide around. So I let the guy on Hardware Swap know, and he actually refunded me $20, which meant I was able to spend 15 of that $20 on another 4GB of DDR3 from Hardware Swap, and then spend $50 on a DIY PC P3 RGB case. This is a tempered glass RGB case, and while it's not the best to build in and doesn't really have very much airflow, it was only $50 for a lot of RGB, and it looks pretty sweet. So I was happy to pick all that up, and that's the end of my parts list. So now let's get into the actual build of the PC and see how it performs. So once all the parts arrived, I cleaned all the used parts, which was mostly just the motherboard and CPU cooler because they were the dustiest parts. And then to address the motherboard problems, I couldn't really do much about the bend. I could ratchet it down when installing it, but that's about as much as I could do. But for the VRM, I did the best I could to clean the thermal pad, and then I actually used a zip tie to work as a pin on the one side so that it could still hold tight against the VRMs and maybe cool them down just a little bit. But outside of that, the build was pretty uneventful and went about as well as you could expect any build to go. Everything went in pretty easily. The case, not the easiest to build in, but it was fine. No big issues with it. And yeah, the build was done. And before I benchmarked, I decided to throw in a few quick overclocks. So that last 4 GB of RAM that I bought was only 1333 megahertz. So I overclocked all the RAM up to 1600 megahertz just for a little bit of extra speed because the other 2 sticks were already 1600 megahertz, and that worked no problems. And then for the CPU, I was actually able to hit 4.8 gigahertz, so I wasn't really expecting with such a small cooler, but it turns out that thing's actually a beast. The only thing that I did have to do though was take the front off the case because the little slits for air did absolutely nothing for those 3 fans in the front. For my testing, I did take off the front panel because the temperatures were just getting way too high without it, or with it, but without it, everything was fine, and I was actually really impressed with that tiny cooler. But now that you know what I'm running and how the build went, let's get into those benchmarks. Starting out with Cinebench R20, the 2600K reached 1743 points, which did let me down a little bit, as with a 4.8 GHz overclocked, I'd hope for a little more, but that doesn't matter too much. In Crystal Diskmark, the hard drive I picked up did about as poorly as I expected from an old used hard drive, with the numbers seen on screen which frankly suck, but I wasn't about to get an SSD, so what can you do? But now moving on to the more interesting stuff with the ray tracing tests. In the 3D Mark Port Royale benchmark, this PC scored 3,738, which I guess is pretty good. Then in Battlefield 5 medium settings with ultra ray tracing and DLS, the gameplay was pretty smooth with an average of 66.4 FPS, a 1% low of 23.9, and a 0.1% low of 12.2. And while those lows are pretty low, I didn't find it very steady, so maybe I'm just blind, but I found the game looked pretty great, even if ray tracing didn't help with that too much. On Metro Exodus with high graphics and ray tracing and DLS on, I got an average of 79.6 FPS, 1% low of 8.9, and a 0.1% low of 2.5 FPS. And again, I don't know if I'm blind or something, but I found that this looked fine and I didn't really notice any stuttering, but who knows. So the final game tested was Anthem, which while I know has ray tracing support now, didn't have at the time of testing. So this was just run at the medium preset and got 76.3 FPS with lows of 37.2 for 1% and 7.6 for 0.1%, which again looked fine for me, but maybe I just don't notice stuttering or something. Okay, so that's the build, and I think I did pretty well, but I definitely wouldn't recommend any of you guys go out and build a PC like this, as it was pretty unbalanced. If you really want a current gen card, I would recommend something like a 16 series card, so a 1660 or 1660 Ti, just because that seems where the real value is. I don't really think ray tracing is worth it, but strictly for this competition, I think I did pretty well with what we were given. So I really hope I was able to win one of the awards in this build. So be on the lookout for the awards video, which should be coming along in the next week, and I'll have linked down below once it's uploaded, along with everybody in the tech fam who participated in this challenge. I had a lot of fun with this one, and all of their videos will also be linked in a playlist down below. So be sure to check all of them out, as I'm sure all their videos are fantastic and they did some great builds. But I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you want to see more content like this, be sure to subscribe. If you like this video, be sure to like it. If you want notifications on when I upload, be sure to hit that bell. And I think that's about it. So thanks for watching. Bye.